Hi guys, this week we are going to be doing an introduction to postmodernism and looking at some of the theories by John Baudrillard. Now, this is quite complicated stuff. We're going to be going through quite a lot of things here. Some of you, we may have been through some of this before. Some of you, this might be the first time. Um, if you don't understand it, do not worry. We'll be talking about it a lot in class. This is just an introduction, and hopefully you understand most of it. It is a lot to get through, so we are really just going through the sort of basics today. A lot to get through, so if you want to watch it a couple of times, that would be wise. Please take notes as we go through. You will need to refer back to a lot of this in lessons and essays and things to come. So here we go. What is postmodernism? Well, it's a wide topic that covers a lot of different themes and techniques that can be seen readily in the media today. So, yeah, one of the problems about talking about postmodernism really is that it's so common today that a lot of you can't really see the trees for the wood. A lot of the things that when I was your age, the techniques that started to be used were very exciting and very different. Because they're so common today, I might tell you them and you might think, yeah, and what's so impressive about that? Well, it was very impressive for me when I first saw it. I'll try and explain it to you as we go through. Um, Basically, the main principle is that everything has been done. Everything's been done before. Nothing is original anymore. So you can't really do anything that's original. You've got to sort of try and find ways of addressing old texts and doing something new with something that's already been done. To what extent do you believe this to be true? So have a think yourself. Do you think this is true? Do you think there's nothing original anymore? Do you think everything is sort of similar to something else? Is everything, yeah, a copy of something else? Think about music. Think about films and TV shows you like. Maybe you could make a couple of notes about things you've thought. You might have thought, a band you like is just the same as something else that had been before, or a TV show is very similar to something else. Maybe The Walking Dead, that seems very much like 28 Days Later, or maybe there's nothing that's original anymore. Bear that in mind as we go forwards. So what are the features of a postmodern text? Well, there are a lot of features of postmodern text, more than we can really get through today, but I'm going to be talking you through some of the main ones. And I've also tried to think of good examples to sort of explain these. We could, spend a lot of time going through each of these, but I will just explain them in a kind of briefest of ways, and hopefully you'll understand it. If you have any questions, obviously just ask me in class, and we can go through it again. And as it says in very small writing at the bottom of this page, please make notes. You will have to make notes here because this is going to be the task for you to complete after this. So make some notes, make sure you understand it. So this is the slide with all the sort of definitions and answers on. So spend a bit of time on here looking at all these different things. These are the techniques basically that you will need to look for in many of the products that we look at, and you will need to talk about these in the exam. So I'm going to talk through these sort of one by one and try and give you some examples of this. I think in most cases I'm going to be talking about Shaun of the Dead, because Shaun of the Dead has most of these elements in it, just Shaun of the Dead. Some of them it doesn't, so I will have to talk about other things, but hopefully I can get through most of it with Shaun of the Dead. So, first of all, we have irony. Irony is where the narrative usually goes the opposite way to which we expect it. Sorry, that was a bit of a muddled line. I hope you got that. The narrative usually goes the opposite way to expected and challenge expectations. Yeah, I think you get that. So the narrative goes the opposite way to expectations and challenges those expectations. Apologies, that was a very poor written line. So basically, what you expect to happen, what should happen, the opposite happens. And it's sort of ironic. I'm sure you've heard the word irony before. So an example of this from Shaun of the Dead could be, at the start of the film, Shaun's girlfriend Liz is complaining that they always go to the pub. He never takes her anywhere else. When the zombie apocalypse comes upon them and they're looking for somewhere to sort of stay safe, of course Shaun decides to take her to the pub. So the pub becomes sort of the place that saves them in some way, and they go there for safety. So it's sort of ironic they should end up going there. Intertextuality, a text referring to another text. So this is where, one text possibly makes a joke or a reference or something to a different text. And the only way you'd fully understand that is if you knew the text it was referring to. So, for instance, Shaun of the Dead is referring to Dawn of the Dead, the film Dawn of the Dead that came out in the 70s. So we've got Shaun of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead. You wouldn't understand why it's called Shaun of the Dead if you didn't know Dawn of the Dead. You just think, well, that's a weird title. There are other intertextual references within Shaun of the Dead. There's quite a lot. So at one point he says, when he's working in his shop, he addresses the people in the shop and says, I'm sorry, Ash couldn't make it in today. Well, Ash is a character from Evil Dead, a different film. The shop he actually works in is called 4E's Electrics, and Ken 4E's was the star of Dawn of the Dead, the film that they're parodying. So lots of stuff like that. But you would see intertextual references in, The Simpsons, Family Guy, Rick and Morty, all sorts of stuff. Hybrids. A hybrid is a mix of genres. So Shaun of the Dead is a rom-com with zombies. Very clear, it's a romantic comedy and it happens to have zombies in it. However, there are other more subtle hybrids, things like The Office, which is a sitcom mixed with a sort of documentary, or you'd have The Matrix, which is a sci-fi, kung fu, romance action film, or Titanic, which some people have said was a historical romance with action. So it's stuff like that. Self-reflexivity. This is where characters seem to know they are in a text. It's where characters seem to know that they're in a film. So Shaun, a couple of times, he refers to the plan that he will be doing. He says, we can run over and pick up Mum and Liz, then go off to the pub and sit back and wait for this to blow over. When he's explaining his plan, you see him acting it out in a sort of montage. And at the end of each scene, he looks at the camera and raises his glass and winks. It's like he knows we're watching him. It's almost like he knows he's in a film. So there's that. I mean, there's more obvious versions of that. If you've seen Wayne's World, he literally talks to the camera. He knows he's in a film. At the end of the film, he says, I didn't really like the ending of that film. Let's try a different ending. You've got Ferris Bueller, who as well talks to the camera and says about what he's going to be doing to the audience. At the end of the film, he even says, after the credits, there's a post-credit sequence, and he comes out in his dressing gown and says, what are you still doing watching? You shouldn't be watching. The film's over. So he kind of knows he's in a film. And of course, I suppose the most obvious example of that would be Deadpool. Deadpool knows he's in a film and talks to the camera all the time. If you read Deadpool comics, he knows he's in a comic. Blends of reality. So this is a mix of reality and fiction. This was a bit of a hard one to think of with Shaun the Dead, but there are areas of it. Obviously, Shaun the Dead is a fictional film. Simon Pegg is playing the part of Shaun in the film. He's not Shaun. That's not a reality. He is Simon Pegg. Nick Frost is not Ed. He is Nick Frost. However, if you look when they're watching the telly, the people they're watching on telly are real news people. So there's a real BBC news person talking about the zombie apocalypse. So this is, in a way, you're thinking, well, that's not an actor. That is the real news reporter. But Simon Pegg's an actor, so they're mixing reality with fiction. You see this quite a lot. If you watch Doctor Who, they'll have real news reporters reporting on Doctor Who stuff and things like that. If you watch The Simpsons, they will have real people appear in The Simpsons. So Lady Gaga will turn up in The Simpsons, and you think this is strange because obviously The Simpsons they're not real people, it's an animation. They're voiced by, Nancy Cartwright voices Bart. However, Lady Gaga appears, she's in the real world, and she turns up and she voices herself. So this is quite a strange sort of blending of reality and fiction, and while it doesn't seem strange today, it was very, very strange back in the day. When I was young, in the 90s, it seemed a very strange thing. When we watched Scream for the first time and the characters are talking about all the films they watch and saying, I watch Halloween, I watch Nightmare on Elm Street, I couldn't believe it. I was thinking, well, I'm watching a fictional film, but they're talking about things that I watch in the real world. This is a collision. You can see other versions of this with things like Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is a sitcom, American sitcom Curb Your Enthusiasm. The characters in that, it stars a character called Larry David, who is that's his real name, and supposedly we're watching his real life. He plays himself. He is a writer, a Hollywood writer, and he plays himself. But we're watching a fictionalized version of his life. It's not real. He's not really like that. So it's sort of fiction mixed with reality. You might see this again with The Office. So The Office is supposed to be a documentary. You watch The Office, especially the English one. You watch the English Office. It's supposed to be a documentary. It's so realistic that it's like a documentary. It's actually quite boring a lot of the time. But it's not a documentary. It's actually fiction. It's just they're acting very real. It blends reality with fiction. Whenever you have this blending of reality with fiction, you could say that's a postmodern technique. Another one is we have fragmented narratives or non-linear narratives. Stories can jump around all over the place. So maybe they don't start at the start and middle and end, but they might start in the middle and then jump to the end and then go back to the start all over the place. This doesn't happen so much in Shaun of the Dead, but if you've seen Pulp Fiction, you've seen Reservoir Dogs, you've seen Memento, this is a non-linear narrative that jumps around. It's much more fragmented. When we come to watch Life on Mars in the second year, you will see these techniques that story sort of jumps around quite a lot. Homage and parody. Well, parody is when you make fun of something, so that would be like Scary Movie or something like that, Not Another Teen Movie. And homage is when you pay tribute to something, so you do something in the style of something else. A bit like Tarantino makes homage of Western films and things like that, or a homage of the 60s with his Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's almost like he's doing something in that style because he loves it so much. They're the two different things. So a parody is sort of a joke. A homage is a loving tribute. Now, bricolage is almost taking the intertextual referencing to a full extreme. Bricolage could be it's more than just referencing to other TV or films, but it will be mixing a range of different influences. So there's a film that I used to love called Kung Fu Hustle, which is a sort of kung fu film, but it mixes so much influence that at times it goes into a music video, at times it looks like animation, at times it looks like video game. It's all different sort of styles mixed together. People have said as well, Kill Bill, if you watch Kill Bill by Tarantino, that's a kind of bricolage, because the influences that he's got throughout it, the things he's quoting, seem to be from a range of different texts. So you've got sort of 60s surf music, you've got references to westerns, or samurai movies, or Hong Kong kung fu, stuff like Bruce Lee films. There's even references or quotes of cereal adverts from America. So a range of different things. And finally on this page we have image over narrative. This is where things look really great, but maybe they don't make much sense. So music videos are particularly good at that. Music videos look amazing, but what on earth are we looking at here? Some strange images. One of the ones that I watched to learn this was, I think it's, which was it? It was a Britney Spears song where she's on Mars, but I can't remember which one it is. If anyone knows which Britney Spears song it is, where in the music video she's on Mars, then that'll be it. But I mean, looking at any music video, if you watch some of Katy Perry's videos, they are very strange, some very strange images. They look great, but what on earth do they mean? You can also see it with advertising. There was an advert for Cadbury's chocolate a few years ago that had a gorilla sitting behind a drum kit playing the drums. I'm not too sure what that has to do with Cadbury's chocolate. It was a good advert, looked great, but not too sure what it's got to do with the product. So there are a heck of a lot of media texts out there. Here's some images here of a few things, but there are lots and lots and lots and lots more. Think about the TV shows that you like and the media that you consume. It doesn't have to just be TV, it could be film, it can be music. Think about music. Is music sampling other music? Is it sounding like other things? Are they imitating people in some way or referencing them? Maybe they're just simply covering other songs. Think about how media is being sort of recycled and changed. Try and think of try and think of some products that contain some of these features. So that will be one of the tasks that you will have to complete. Please think about, trying to identify some of these tasks in some of the products that you look at. Right, moving on to the main man now, John Baudrillard. His theory that we will be looking at is simulacra and simulacrum. Right, so very similar words. Basically, they're talking about sort of simulations. So that's what it sounds very similar to simulations. It's just a more sort of fancy word, I would say. Simulacrum is when you're talking about one of them. So if you think of crumb, a crumb, I've just got one crumb. One crumb, one, it's a single one. And the simulacra, means a collection of them. So that's plural, there's lots of them. So if you're talking about a collection of simulations, it's a simulacra. If you're talking about one single one, it's a simulacrum. Okay? I'll explain what I mean by simulations in a moment. So, John Baudrillard believes that we have moved away from reality and we live in a world of artificial copies that are almost impossible to tell from reality. Now, that sounds very strange, but I will sort of try and unpack it. At the bottom here, we've got a picture of a safari tour, some elephants, people meeting elephants on a safari tour. And on the right, we've got the jungle cruise in Disneyland with a sort of plastic elephant squirting water at them. So obviously that is a copy of the real safari tour. Now, I'm not saying that people don't know that that's a copy and it's not fake, but in some respects, people have that copy is more popular than the real safari. There are things about the copy that people prefer. In some respects, the copies, the simulations, have become easier for us as humans than the reality. Our understanding of the world is made up of images of reality constructed through the media. So I often say this to students when I talk about how important it is to study the media. I say, have you ever been to New York? Often they say no. More often than not, they say no. And I say, nor have I, but I know what New York looks like. And I describe it, and it sort of looks like that left-hand picture there of Times Square. I'm pulling my images of New York from all the films I've seen, all the media I've consumed. And so to me, there is a sort of simulacrum of New York, a sort of simulation that's created from all that media that I've consumed. I've never been to New York. I don't know what it's like. I met somebody from New York once and I asked if it was really like that, and they said, well, Alex, New York's huge. It's got countryside, it's got forests, it's got farms, it's got all sorts of stuff. It's not just like you see on the telly. And I actually found that hard to believe. Even though she was from New York, I was kind of like, are you right about that? Well, look on the right here, we've got a picture of an upstate New York farmhouse. That is also New York. So New York isn't just the picture on the left, it's also the picture on the right. And a lot more. So we are, in a way, sort of more inclined to believe the simulation, believe what we've got in our head, what we've been given to us through the media. I'll try and explain some other ways. So Mrs. Fisher, who's on YouTube, Another famous example that we talk about, or I have mentioned before, is that of the Disney castles. When Walt wanted to build his fairy tale castle, he wanted to base it on real fairy tale castles, which is quite a strange concept when you think about it. So he sent his Imagineers off to Europe and said, can you look for some real fairy tale castles? And they found this castle in the middle here. I won't attempt to pronounce it. I don't know how you say that, but it's a German castle. There it is. They found that castle and said, yep, we found a real fairy tale castle. We are going to, we drew it, we took some pictures of it, and we're going to base our castle, Disneyland castle, on that. And if you look at the first two pictures there, you can see some similarities with the turrets and etc. and the towers. Well, that German castle in the middle isn't, surprise, surprise, isn't a real fairy tale castle, because there aren't such things as real fairy tale castles. That castle was built by a man who was a fan of fairy tale stories and wanted to build a castle in the style of a fairy tale castle. I believe it was built in the 1800s sometimes. That's not even that old. In a way, that is a copy of something that never existed. So Disneyland is a copy of Disneyland is a copy of something that never existed. And now, if you Google, you'll find that there are Shrek castles in Universal Studios in Singapore that copy the Disneyland castle. So the Shrek castle is a copy of the Disneyland castle, which is a copy of the German castle, which is a copy of a Hans Christian Andersen sort of fairy tale castle from literature that never existed. So it's a copy of a copy with no original at all. Finally, the last picture on here is a real English castle, and if you compare that to those, they don't look very similar. Castles were basically sort of tanks, buildings for war. They didn't move, obviously, but they were buildings for war. They weren't all sort of turrets and flags and stuff like that, quite in the same way that the Disney one or the German castle were. So this is another example that's often talked about this idea of copies without originals. And it was something that Baudrillard discussed. We live in a world now where we're surrounded with copies that are so separated from reality that they no longer represent the sort of reality that we think they do. In fact, that reality may not have ever existed in the first place. So we need to think, is the product a simulacrum? It's important to consider if we are viewing a simulacrum or a simulacra if there's more than one. So it's a simulacrum, crum if it's single, cra if there's more than one. To what extent are we viewing reality, or are we being presented with a simulacrum, a simulation of some sort? Are we being presented with something that's not true, a simulation of reality? To what extent does the audience actually prefer the simulacra? To what extent do you think the audience rejects reality and would prefer the simulation over what they know to be reality? To what extent do you think people replace reality with the simulations they've got to know themselves? Let me give you an example. I heard about this in QI. I've probably told you all this. It's very interesting. Police in America noticed that when in a gunfight with criminals, often criminals would get shot and not notice that they've been shot because the bullet goes in, the bullet goes out, very quick, adrenaline, you just don't feel it, and you carry on fighting. At some point they would look down and they'd see they'd been shot, and at that point they'd throw themselves against the wall or throw themselves to the floor like you do in films, or like people do in films. Now the understanding here was that when you get shot you fly back, and that overruled their mind the logic of what actually happened to them. So when they looked down, they thought they'd been shot and they thought, oh, I've been shot. And their brain told them, well, when you're shot, you fly against the wall. So they'd throw themselves against the wall. It actually, in a way, overrided the reality of the situation, which is when people get shot, they don't fly back. The bullet goes in, the bullet goes out, and more often than not, they don't even notice. So that's an example there of how we have sort of replaced the simulation. What we see in film is more real to us than reality. How can we use this? Well, we can use it in many different ways. In fact, we can kind of use it on very nearly every single text we look at. But there are some that are more postmodern than others. For instance, music videos. Formation, looking at formation, are we being presented with a true representation of New Orleans, or is it a simulacrum? Is she in New Orleans? Is she just creating this sort of fake hyper reality of New Orleans that's not real? Is she really still on a police car that's sinking in the floods created by Hurricane Katrina? Is that really what's happening there, or is that a simulation? Well, I can tell you, I've been to the house that she films at, and I've not been to New Orleans, so maybe she's not being totally truthful with us. Zoella, we look at Zoella in the second year. Is Zoella a real person, or is she presenting a hyper-reality of her life? Obviously she's sort of real, but is she really like that? I mean, she always is kind of presenting her best side, so to speak. She shows us the greatest, the nice parts of her house, but maybe we don't see all the mess and the horrible stuff. We certainly don't see the negative things that happen in her life. To some extent, people say that her and Alfie's relationship is sort of a representation of the ideal relationship. It's not real. It's just, it's just a sort of hyper reality of what it's like to be in your late 20s Brighton relationship. Is she presenting us with reality, or are we seeing a hyper reality? Life on Mars, we look at this in the second year as well. The character of Sam literally creates a world for himself from the media that he consumed as a kid. He falls into a coma and wakes up in a cop show, and the whole world that he lives in is the media he consumed. And he likes that world. So, to what extent does Sam represent us as an audience, where we consume a lot of media and then we create the world we live in through that media? And it's comforting to us, it comforts us. So, a lot of the times, the stuff we're told on telly, even the news, even bad news, we believe in it, and it's comforting and reassuring to believe in what we're told, the understanding of the world we're presented to. It's very interesting when we watch Life on Mars, especially if you watch it all the way through to the end of the second season and you see the finale. It's I won't spoil it because it's worth watching, but it's very interesting about what he chooses when he chooses reality or the simulation. But there's much more. Yes, you can really apply this theory to almost any text, especially new text today. So you will see references, intertextual references. You'll see hybrid genres happening all the time. You'll see questions of reality and fiction mixing. Lots and lots of postmodern techniques are being used all the time. Try and look out for them as we go forwards. So to conclude, there is a lot to take in here. Please watch this again if you need to. Maybe do a little bit of research into the subject yourself. There's certainly plenty of videos on YouTube, and they are all quite interesting. Try and think of the postmodern techniques in media you consume. That's going to be part of one of the tasks. And please turn to the worksheet that accompanies this and complete the task in the normal fashion and upload them to Teams. Don't upload them to YouTube. I don't think YouTube wants to see that. Sorry about that. Upload it to Teams in the normal fashion. And thanks a lot, and see you in class. Finally, there's a picture of Bart skating away. The Simpsons was a massively postmodern show, broke rules in many, many ways, and sort of bended reality. And it certainly sort of opened my eyes to it in the late 80s and early 90s. There are things in The Simpsons I thought, that's interesting. That's very strange that they were doing that. They seem to know they're in a cartoon at times. Other times they don't. They mix real world politics with the fake world of Springfield. Lots of intertextual referencing. So yeah, there we go. Interesting stuff. As I say, a lot to take on. I hope I haven't bored you too much going on and on. And if you need to research a little more, this will be very useful. If you go onto university, study media, you will be talking about this a lot. Thank you very much, guys. Take care and see you in class.